Okay, good day. This is Lance Thomas, and I'll be doing my presentation on international claims to the Arctic. Okay, so first, a little background about the Arctic. The Arctic is an ocean, the smallest of the 5 known oceans. It's known for its incredibly harsh environment. From the research I've done, being there is kind of like being on another planet. And not much is known about the Arctic because no one has really explored it. It's simply too cold and very unfriendly for navigation. Airplanes do try and fly over the Arctic, and their fuel turns into slush. Ships find it very difficult to navigate the Arctic simply due to the lack of navigational aids and other environmental hazards such as icebergs, etc. So the Arctic is also a very fragile ecosystem, and as climate change takes effect, scientists have said that rising sea levels are due to the melting polar ice caps. This is obviously a threat for low-lying coastal areas and islands such as some of the islands in the Pacific that are threatened with being submerged due to rising sea levels. Of course, there's a host of other environmental threats on a global scale that are associated with climate change, such as the implications for the food chain, invasive species, environmental pollution, and the effects on the indigenous population. Okay, so given all of these issues, one may ask, why would anyone want to pursue economic activity in the Arctic? Well, the Arctic is abundant in natural resources and offers tremendous economic benefits. The biggest benefit would be the northwest and northeast passages. The Northwest Passage is a strait that weaves through the Canadian archipelago, and the Northern Sea or Northeast Passage is the passes through Russian territory. As polar ice melts and these straits become navigable, transit through the Arctic promises to revolutionize global trade. So the Northwest Passage would reduce transit times between Europe and North America by 25%. And the Northern Sea Route or Northeastern Sea Route would decrease transit times between Asia and Europe by 40%. So you can see how significant opening up these sea routes would be for world trade. Okay, 90% of global trade goes by sea, and in 2006, U.S. maritime trade accounted for 2.5 billion tons of domestic and international commerce, and that number is expected to double by 2020. The Northwest and Northern Sea Route would make that very much a possibility. So shipping companies could avoid dangerous choke points such as the Straits of Malacca and the Strait of Hormuz, and there's many additional yet unforeseen benefits. With regard to mineral wealth, the Arctic has 13% of the world's known oil deposits. It's got 1/3 of its natural gas. It's abundant in fish and other mineral wealth. It also is rich in flora and fauna, and there's indigenous communities that live there. So moving on to the international claims to Arctic territory. The law governing these claims are established under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the Law of the Sea basically establishes limits of a country's territorial claims. So waters 12 nautical miles off a country's coast are considered its territorial waters. That is, that water is treated as if it's part of the country for legal purposes. Waters that are 200 miles off the shore is considered an exclusive economic zone, which gives a country control of the economic resources, but prevents that country from stopping others from transiting or loitering. So in order to maximize their territorial and exclusive economic zones, countries will typically claim an island, something really insignificant that might be hundreds of miles off its shores, so it can claim the territory around that island as theirs. Okay, this creates conflict between nations and is one of the many things the law of the sea was created to resolve. So the U.S. has not ratified the law of the sea, therefore the U.S. is not able to pursue its own claims in the Arctic. The other 4 Arctic nations have ratified the law of the sea and are actively pursuing their individual territorial claims. So starting with Russia. Okay, so Russia owns approximately 3/5 of the land around the Arctic. Russia claims the North Pole, and as the slide shows, in 2007 a Russian submarine planted a Russian flag on the North Pole seabed in order to demonstrate their claim to that landmark. Okay, Russia's claims are based on the fact that there's a ridge called the Lomonosov Ridge that extends from Russia to the North Pole. However, Canada and Norway also have valid claims to the Lomonosov Ridge, and in fact Denmark appears to have actually have the strongest claim to that. So Canada owns less territory than Russia around the Arctic, but more than the other countries. Canada's claims are based on its long history in the Arctic. Also, back in 1925, there was something called the sector theory that was introduced, and that divided the Arctic among nations and gave Canada the North Pole. But Canada's biggest claim to the Northwest Passage, which it claims as internal waters, this would mean that Canada could basically control traffic through the Northwest Passage, and that's his claim. Naturally, that claim has been disputed by the United States and other Arctic nations. So Norway and Denmark. Norway lies partly on the Arctic Ocean, and for 40 years Norway and Russia were locked in a dispute regarding the oil-rich Barents Sea, which is part of the Arctic. In 2010 the dispute was resolved, and Norway now drills for oil in the Barents. Denmark and Canada have disputed ownership of Hans Island. It's a tiny barren rock that's located halfway between Greenland and Canada, Greenland being part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And so the Canadians and Danes have had a kind of a friendly dispute about Hans Island. The island does sit on very large reserves of petroleum, which explains why they're both competing for it. Okay, the U.S. Claims part of the Arctic based on its ownership of Alaska. However, the U.S. has not ratified the law of the sea and has not been assertive about staking its claim to Arctic resources. I'm not sure why, but I believe it has to do with the U.S. not wanting to follow law of the sea conventions and also having some doubts about how to proceed with regard to developing the Arctic region. Okay, so non-Arctic nations such as China and Italy have also made their play for the Arctic. China is building up its icebreaker fleet. It also has bought a Russian petroleum company and has used the law of the sea to make its claim to the Arctic. Italy is a good demonstration of how difficult it is to operate in the Arctic. The Italian oil company Eni has struggled with costs in trying to establish oil exploration operations. However, the company insists on pursuing what it hopes will ultimately prove to be a profitable venture there. Okay, so now that companies have and countries have actually tried to start to invest in the Arctic and to implement some of the plans that they have developed, reality has begun to set in. They have started to question many of the original assumptions. Because of the cold environment, the Arctic is very difficult to operate in. Costs are very high. At the same time, petroleum prices have declined. So for this reason, many countries no longer see exploration and development in the Arctic as a viable course of action or as cost effective. In addition, transit through the Arctic has not taken off the way many expected. This is because of the ever-present ice that presents a navigational hazard. It's also difficult to predict ice coverage. The variability of ice prevents larger ships from transiting regularly, and while some cruise ships make the rare passage, there were no commercial transits of the Northwestern Passage in 2014 and 2015. So, since the BRIC countries of Canada and China, the BRIC countries of Russia and China lack the technological ability to develop the Arctic resources, and the developed countries of the world, such as the US and Canada, are more reluctant to pursue economic activity due to the risk to the environment. My assessment is that for the foreseeable future, the Arctic will remain in a state of relative preservation. So that concludes my presentation. Hope it was informative and enjoyable. Thank you and have a great day.